The town of Duskfall had a sheriff named Cole Mercer, and the town had opinions about him the way small towns always do, freely and without invitation. He was tall, spare-worded, and carried himself with the particular stillness of a man who had decided long ago that most things didn't require a reaction. He had been sheriff for 6 years. He had never once been seen at a social gathering. He had never once been heard raising his voice. He had, on 2 separate occasions, walked a wounded man 3 miles through a winter storm rather than leave him on the road, and both men had survived. And neither had ever heard Cole Mercer say a single word about it afterward. The town called him cold. He didn't correct them. Clara Voss had arrived in Duskfall 14 months earlier with 2 children, a wagon with a cracked wheel, and the kind of quiet dignity that belongs to women who have learned to grieve without an audience. Her husband, Thomas, had died of a fever the previous spring. He had been a good man, steady, earnest, better at building things than at talking about them. Clara had loved him simply and without complication, the way you love something you never expected to lose. When he was gone, she had done what women on the frontier did. She had kept moving. She bought a small piece of land on the eastern edge of town. She planted a kitchen garden. She took in mending work from the dry goods store and made bread twice a week that she sold from her front window. She raised her children, Nora, who was 8 and already more observant than most adults, and Sam, who was 6 and conducting a personal investigation into every insect in the territory. She did not ask for help. She did not complain. She did not look at the road west the way some widows did, as though waiting for something to come back along it. She had made her peace with where she was, or she was working on it. Some mornings were harder than others. The first time Cole Mercer spoke more than 3 words to Clara Voss was in September, when a man named Purdy had helped himself to the back of her property and begun pulling fence posts with the intention of expanding his own line. Clara had gone to the sheriff's office herself. She had not sent word. She had not waited. She had walked in on a Tuesday morning, explained the situation without embellishment, and stood with her hands folded and her eyes level while Cole listened. He had listened completely. Then he had put on his hat, walked out to her property, and told Purdy, quietly, without theater, that the fence posts would be returned by morning or Purdy would find the conversation considerably less comfortable the second time. The fence posts were back by nightfall. When Clara came to thank him the following day, Cole said only, "It was your land," as though that explained everything, as though it required no further discussion. She thought about that phrase for the rest of the week, the plainness of it, the absolute absence of expectation inside it. She had grown so accustomed to favors arriving with the invisible weight of future obligation that a kindness offered and immediately closed, no ledger opened, no debt implied, felt almost unfamiliar. She found it the most decent thing anyone had done for her in a long time. They did not become friends quickly. That was not the nature of either of them. But Duskfall was small, and the roads crossed the same ways every day. And Cole Mercer had taken to walking the eastern edge of town at dusk in a route that passed, entirely by coincidence, the front of Clara's property at roughly the time she was finishing her evening work. He never stopped. He tipped his hat. She nodded back. This went on for 3 weeks before Nora, who missed nothing, looked up from her supper one evening and said, "The sheriff looks at our house when he walks past." Clara said, "Eat your beans." But she had noticed, too, in October, Sam fell out of the old cottonwood at the edge of the yard and broke his wrist. Clara had been in the garden. She heard the sound before she heard the crying, that particular crack and silence that stops a mother's heart entirely. She ran. Sam was on the ground, pale, and trying very hard not to make noise, which was worse somehow than if he had screamed. She was wrapping his arm with a strip of her apron when she heard boots on the path behind her. Cole had been passing. He was simply there. "I'll get the doctor," he said. He didn't ask if she needed help. He didn't wait to be invited. He turned and walked with a pace that was not quite running but arrived at the same destination, and the doctor was at her door in 11 minutes. Later, after Sam had been seen to and dosed with something that made him sleep, and Nora had finally stopped standing in the doorway with the expression of a child trying very hard to appear calm, Cole sat on the front step of Clara's house in the early dark and didn't leave until he was certain she was all right. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. When she came outside to tell him he could go, she found him whittling a small figure from a piece of wood. A horse, she thought, still rough-edged and unfinished. He looked up. "Boy doing okay?" "Sleeping," she said. "Thank you." He nodded and folded the knife away and stood. He looked at her for a moment with that steady, unhurried attention she had come to recognize as simply how he saw things, fully, without pretense. "You're managing a great deal on your own," he said. It was not a question, it was not pity. It was a plain observation, offered without judgment. The way you might note the weather or the state of a road. She met his eyes. "Yes," she said, "I am." Something shifted in his expression. Not much, but enough to notice. The town began talking in November. This was inevitable. Duskfall talked about everything, and the sheriff walking past the widow Voss's property each evening had not gone unobserved. The opinions were varied. Marta Hess at the laundry said it was about time. Lou Granger at the saloon said Cole Mercer had no business near a woman with children given the nature of his work. Old Pruitt, who had lived in Duskfall longer than the town had a name, said nothing, but watched everything with the bright, patient eyes of a man who had seen this particular story before and knew how it ended. Clara heard the talk. She went about her work without comment. Cole heard it too. He continued his evening walk. One night in late November, he stopped, not at the gate, not with any particular announcement. He simply stopped walking at the edge of her path and said into the cooling air between them, "I know what they're saying." Clara looked up from the lamp she had been trimming on the porch. "I imagine you do," she said. "Does it bother you?" She considered the question seriously, the way he asked everything, which meant he expected a serious answer. "It bothers me less than you might think," she said finally. "I stopped arranging my life around what Duskfall thought of it, around the same time I started doing it entirely alone." He looked at her. "That's fair," he said. And then, because he was Cole Mercer and did nothing without having already considered it completely, "I'd like to sit on your porch if that would be all right. If it isn't, I'll go on." She moved the lamp to make room. He sat. He came back the following evening, and the one after that. They talked about ordinary things at first. The state of the road south, Sam's wrist, which was healing, Nora's habit of correcting the schoolteacher, which Clara was not sure whether to encourage or address. Cole told her, without particular drama, that the schoolteacher was wrong about the Missouri River, and Nora was right to say so. Clara laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. He stored it away without meaning to, the same way he had stored every other precise and particular thing about her without deciding to. "You like children," she said. It surprised her. She hadn't expected that. He was quiet for a moment. "I do," he said. "I had a son." They had landed in the air between them and stayed there. "I'm sorry," Clara said, and she meant it without performance. "He was 2 years old," Cole said. "Fever. Same year I took the badge. His mother left after." He said it plainly, without seeking sympathy, the way a man describes a scar when someone asks about it. Not to wound, not to invite comfort. Simply because it was the truth, and she had offered him the honesty of her own grief, and it seemed right to return it. "That kind of loss," Clara said slowly, "makes you either close up completely or it makes you understand things about other people that they can't explain to you themselves." Cole turned to look at her, that long, careful look. "Which do you think it did?" She looked back at him steadily. "Both," she said. "At different times. I think you're still deciding." The evening settled around them, cold and still. Somewhere down the road, a horse shifted in its stall. The lamp between them burned low and even. "You see people clearly," he said at last. "I have children," she replied. "You learn fast." He asked her to marry him on a Wednesday morning, not on the porch, not at dusk. Not in any of the soft and expected ways. He came to her door just after sunrise, hat in hand, before the children were up, and when she opened it he said, directly, without preamble, in the plain and careful way that was simply how he was. "I've been thinking about this long enough that I know what I think. I'd like to marry you, Clara. Not because you need looking after. You've made it plain you don't. Because I want to be in your life. Yours and the children's. I want the porch evenings and the bread on Thursdays, and Sam's questions about every living thing he finds in a field, and Nora correcting people who deserve it. I want all of it, and I hope you might want something too." He stopped. He waited. Clara stood in the doorway of her house in the early morning light, looking at this quiet, difficult, entirely decent man who had never once tried to fix her or save her or make himself necessary, who had simply shown up and stayed and meant it. "I do want something," she said. "What is it?" She looked at him for a long moment. "This," she said. "Already. I just wasn't certain you did." They were married on a Friday in December. The town came in its entirety, partly out of genuine warmth, and partly because nobody had expected Cole Mercer to marry anyone, and the whole of Duskfall wanted to see it with their own eyes. Sam wore his good shirt and lost one of the buttons before the ceremony was half done. Nora stood very straight and watched everything with the serious, cataloging attention of a child who understood she was witnessing something important. When Cole took Clara's hand at the front of that small church, his face was the same as it always was, still, composed, unreadable to most. But old Pruitt, who was sitting in the third row and had seen everything in 60 years of living, leaned over to Marta Hess and said quietly, "Look at his hands." Cole's hands, holding Clara's, were entirely, perfectly still. Not the stillness of control, the stillness of a man who has finally set something down. The following spring, a stranger passing through Duskfall stopped at the general store and asked about the sheriff. "Cold man?" he said. Heard he was hard to know. The storekeeper considered this. "Used to be," he said finally. Something changed. The stranger asked what. The storekeeper thought about the two children who now ran through the sheriff's office on Saturday afternoons, about the bread that appeared on Cole's desk every Thursday without fail, about the way the whole shape of the man had shifted. Not softened exactly, but opened, the way a window opens when a room has been closed too long. He found where he was supposed to be, the storekeeper said. "That simple?" The storekeeper put his pencil down. "That hard," Huss said, "and then that simple. That's how it usually goes. If this story reached you quietly in a corner of the world I'll never see, leave it in the comments. What city? What country? What hour of the day? These stories are written for someone. I'm glad today it was you.